Hello, everyone. Happy May 1st, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Brandy Fowler, and I'm coming to you live from the LinkedIn office in Atlanta. Before we get started, make sure you hit the comments, tell us about where you're from, your career. This is a great opportunity to network with each other. And if you have any questions during the show, make sure to drop those in the comments. And also, we have another great show for you today. My colleague Andrew Seaman talked last week on his Get Hired podcast about what to know about building resumes. And we're digging deeper into that topic today on Get Hired Live. He talked to Anna Lokotkova, who is the founder of CV Labs. And Anna is here with us today, too. Anna, thank you so much for joining. And I am sorry for stumbling over your last name.
Hi, Brandy. It's all good. No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as you know, your resume is your first impression for an employer, but it's not always easy to know how to structure it in a way that's effective, right? So, what is one of the biggest mistakes that you've seen job seekers make on their resumes?
I think the biggest one that is definitely the most common is not selling your experience well enough. So, a lot of people are underselling themselves on their own resumes. And the main reason for that, other than perhaps not understanding the full extent of what it takes to build a compelling resume, is the fact that 9 times out of 10, we believe that what is obvious to us is also obvious to other people. So a lot of people think that your experience speaks for yourself, and it's just clear from a quick glance at your resume that you're truly good at what you do, which in fact is not really the case. So 9 times out of 10, what is obvious to you is not obvious to everyone else. And the main thing that your resume is supposed to do or is meant to do is actually communicate the details of what it is that you do and how you do it, so that other people can also understand that you truly are good at what you do and you're worth interviewing. But unfortunately, most resumes these days don't do that.
Yes. And on that same note, I think it can be tempting to put everything on your resume, every single piece of experience you've ever had. And that you've talked to Andrew about how that is not a good thing, how that's actually one of your pet peeves. So, can you talk about why it's important to streamline your resume and what job seekers should be focusing on when they do that?
Absolutely. I understand that intuitively you might think that more information should be better. And that's what most job seekers have. They want to show the most information and the most amount of detail possible because they believe that the more I show, the better I look. But unfortunately, that works against you. And the main thing is hiring managers or recruiters or whoever it is looking at your resume does not have all the time in the world to dive into every single detail. So if you truly want to impress the recruiter or whoever it is on the hiring side, you need to understand how employers think and how they look at a resume of a potential candidate. And that's why streamlining that information is extremely important. You need to make sure that within seconds, the most relevant information is already visible to the reader. So they don't have to spend minutes even, or God forbid, hours looking for the most relevant information they actually need to know about you in order to make the decision whether they want to interview or not. So you do want to make sure that you're putting the most relevant information first. And by relevant, I don't simply mean the stuff that you are proud or you're proud of, or perhaps other things that you believe are relevant. So whether something is relevant or not, it's actually determined by the job posting and the requirements and the expectations of the job.
That is so, so helpful. I want to take a moment to say hi to some people who are chiming in the comments. Hi, Marco from Italy, Sade from New York City, Kevin from Minnesota, Yolanda from Texas, Maya from San Francisco, Anne from Florida, and Matthew from Atlanta. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to go back to another question for you, Anna. So if you remove things from your resume, how do you still show that skill set on your resume? So you don't feel like you remove something and they can't see what you can do.
So yeah, it's a very common challenge actually. And the main thing that you can do is you can still showcase some of the transferable elements from the type of experience or the type of information that you're not including on your resume. So if something is not shown in the standard format where you're expecting to see some detailed bullet points or like a very lengthy summary, it doesn't mean that you still cannot include some elements from that. So you have other sections of your resume, like the summary or the skills section, or you can create another section and call it highlights of your career, or key projects, or leadership snapshot, depending on your level of career, your background, and your experience. And in there, you can still showcase the most relevant accomplishments or the most transferable elements and skills from the experience that perhaps is not included in detail on your resume.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that you keep saying, which is so important, is it's the relevant part of it. You have to make sure that what you're putting on your resume is relevant to the job that you're applying for. And then also, you mentioned the summary. So what should go in your summary? Should that be tailored for the job that you want as well?
100%. Every single section should be tailored, and the summary section is no exception. What should be in the summary? The main thing that should be there is your value proposition. So if I could say it in simpler words, I would say think about how you can be helpful to other people, specifically to this company, given your skill set, given that job opportunity that you're interested in. Show how what you already have connects to what the job talks about. So if your summary still has that objective statement where you're talking about the type of role you're seeking or the type of opportunity you're interested in, that is not the most effective summary that would market your skill set and market you as a professional. So reverse the process and think, how can I add value? That's what needs to be in your summary.
That's awesome. And I'm treating this kind of like a resume workshop. So let's move on to the experience section, which comes right after the summary. You talked about how important it is for your experience section to be organized, readable, and to show your outcomes and results. So can you talk about how you can improve that on your resume if it's not looking that way?
Absolutely. So one thing that I would start with is take a look at the length and the amount of information you have in your experience section. So if you're looking at your previous jobs and you're finding 10 bullets under each specific experience, that's too much information. Nobody is going to read a list of 10 different statements to be able to understand what you're capable of. So you want to make sure that you're including way fewer bullets than that. So ideally aim for 5 to 6, I would say, although there is no like right or wrong answer here. Like you could put 3 and that could still be enough or more than okay in terms of marketing your previous experience. But my point is, keep it short enough for people to be able to actually screen through that in a matter of seconds versus taking minutes or hours to be able to understand what it is that you're talking about. Also, there's a big difference between describing the functional elements of your job, so the tasks, the responsibilities that you had, what you actually did on a daily basis, and how you did those things and the results that you accomplished. So if you do want to include a bit of a functional overview, you can still have a very short 2 to 3 line summary under each specific job title, and then highlight only your relevant accomplishments, results, and outcomes as bullet points. So that way you make a clear distinction between results versus just a general overview of what your job was really about.
That is so, so helpful, especially about the bullet points, because I think a lot of people can get lost in trying to, add in as many bullet points as they can to make it look like they have, more experience or, are more qualified. So that's great. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to take a member question, which is on topic with what we were talking about. And we were talking about experience, and we have a question from Nicole who says, I'm approaching graduation and applying to full-time jobs, but I'm unsure about what to include in my experience section since I don't have prior work experience like internships. What should I add? That's really, really good.
Yeah, so for recent graduates, I would say that you have to market everything out of your educational experience as possible, or any other extracurricular things that you've done in the past. So any projects that you handled during your studies, or any team initiatives. Maybe you organized a volunteer project, or you brought people together to organize an event, whatever it is. Maybe you did some fundraising for that university or for the college that you went to. So all those different things can still be a good enough proxy to showcase some of the skills that you've already acquired, even though you don't have any or much real life work experience. So you want to make sure that you're highlighting all those different projects, and even any projects that were part of your assignments, for example. So sometimes you are given case studies or you're given team projects to do together, and then you submit a certain piece of work or whatever it is. So that way you're still highlighting different elements of who you are and what makes you stand out from the competition. Because anyone who has or is soon graduating can say that, yeah, I'm just graduating and this is the type of degree that I have. But not many people actually did stuff outside of that, or something that goes a little bit beyond the minimum requirements. So if you can find those projects, activities, that would be incredibly beneficial for your resume.
That's really great. And before I go back to more questions that I have for you, I'm going to say hello to some more people that are chiming in. Hello to Suri from Virginia, Mark from Tennessee, Pam from New York, Hilda from Ohio, and Pamela from Texas. Thank you so much for joining. And one of the things that I hear so much about resumes is that you want to show your outcomes and your results in a way that captures managers' attention. Like, don't just list what you did in the job, show your outcomes and results. But can you give us an example of a way that you can make like a generic resume bullet point look like that, like a specific outcome?
Oh, 100%. That is like one of my favorite topics for sure, because most of the resumes I see actually do have the most generic information on there. And I love the process of helping people customize that and make it a lot more descriptive and more detailed. So, for example, a lot of people include simple tasks on their resumes, such as event planning. So, let's say you're someone who is good at organizing events, and you believe that simply by saying that event planning was one of your skills or one of the functions that you did at your previous jobs, you believe that this is more than enough for people to understand that you're good at planning and organizing events. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And that brings us back to where we kind of started today. What is obvious to you may not be obvious to other people. So if you want to show not only the fact that you've organized events, but what kind of events. So for example, you could say that you planned and organized corporate and team building events. So that's a different story. Then there is a whole new question of how big were those events, because organizing an event for 10 people or for 1,000 people are two very different jobs. So if you plan those large scale events for, let's say, up to 1,000 participants, say that. Also, how many events you organized in a year. So organizing one event is very different from organizing 20 or organizing 100. So event planning can actually become something like planned and organized over 20 corporate and team building events for up to 1,000 participants, in 1 year, something like that. So you didn't really, there were no miracles here. There's no magic. You're simply adding enough context for people to understand not only what you did, but also the scope of what you did and some of the specific outcomes, because organizing that number of events is already an outcome and an accomplishment in itself. So that could be one example.
So helpful. Thank you for that. And also, one of the things that you and Andrew talked about that I loved was how to avoid ageism on your resume. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether you should include the years that you graduated from college on your resume. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something that we should not be doing?
So really that depends, but I think denying ageism as a factor would not be productive, because whether we like it or not, it is a factor. So if you're someone who has quite a bit of experience in your past and you do believe that age is a factor, or you've already encountered situations where age has been a barrier in you accomplishing certain things, yes, you can absolutely leave the year of graduation off of your resume so that people don't really have an opportunity to start calculating from there. But at the same time, hiding something or going like above and beyond to hide that may be also counterproductive. So, I mean, if people go onto your LinkedIn profile, for example, and they end up finding more information from your earlier experience, they could still do the math and kind of understand what's the approximate age that they're dealing with. But at the same time, I think it all comes from your own confidence and viewing your own age as a plus, as a bonus, as an asset. And versus like, other than, thinking about strategies to hide that or to kind of avoid showing your age, I would rather choose a different path. And I would say, look for ways how you can showcase that you're staying up to date with the latest and modern trends in your profession, in your industry. Because it doesn't matter, like your age is just a number. And if you're someone who is constantly upgrading, doing different, like engaging with professional development stuff or educating yourself, learning at the job and beyond the job, then your experience can only become a big bonus. And you can still you can still show on your resume that you are staying up to date and you are staying current. And that's what truly matters.
That is great to know. Thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, we have a question from the audience that I was going to ask you a similar question, but Doris asked, with a long career, how far back do we go with the experience? Is putting in a grad year a negative if it's prior to 1990?
Generally speaking, yes. So I would leave the grad year off in that case. And in terms of the number of years, again, I'm generalizing, but ballpark, you want to go no more than 10 years into your previous experience. So it doesn't mean, though, that everything that happened before that has to completely be eliminated and we have to forget that it ever happened. Because there might still be some important details in that earlier experience that might position you well for this particular job. And even though that experience from your early years does not have the same relevance as your experience from yesterday or a year ago, you can still summarize the key elements of that experience. It's just that you would do it in a much more concise way. So you wouldn't have like a whole half a page talking about that earlier experience. Just summarize it in a quick summary. Summarize it in a summary, huh? But anyway, so summarize the key elements of that experience and the key accomplishments and the things that sound relevant to the job you're applying for today. But don't allocate a whole page or half a page or even a third of a page to do that, because unfortunately that earlier experience is no longer the same as your most recent one.
Super helpful. Thank you so much for that too. And then let's talk about the skills section since we've been bringing that up quite a bit during this conversation. How do you highlight your skills in a skills section? What should you avoid doing also?
Well, what you should avoid doing is listing all kinds of skills. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. Again, using the same mindset, more information should theoretically be better. So again, if you have a list of 20 different skills and all of them are so generic, so for example, leadership or communication or coaching or training, so those skills by themselves are way too generic for any person on the hiring side to understand what they actually mean in your life and in your experience. So get rid of all those generic skills and make sure that your skills are as specific to your profession, to your industry, to this particular company as possible. And I would say that you should be okay with about 9 skills tops. It doesn't mean that you don't have any other skills. You still might, and that's okay. And you can use your LinkedIn profile, for example, to showcase more. But on your resume, make sure that you're only including the most relevant ones. And the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that you are applying for this particular job opportunity. So you got to look at the job posting to see what wording the company is using to name certain skills. Because a lot of the times the same skill could be named 100 different ways. And you want to make sure that the wording you're using to highlight that skill actually resembles the one from the job posting. So it's not, you're not simply listing skills the way you imagine they should be named, but you're actually using the language the employer is using. So that's when you actually that's how you make sure that your resume matches the requirements of the job a lot better.
Thank you so much for that. And you brought up LinkedIn, and I was actually going to ask you, how do you balance what's on your resume with your LinkedIn profile?
Ooh, that's a good question, because for a lot of people, those two things are still identical to each other, and they really shouldn't be. There is so much more room on your LinkedIn profile to showcase more information. And again, doesn't mean that you need to overpopulate your LinkedIn profile with your entire biography from from the childhood to today, but at the same time, obviously, you have a lot more freedom than on your resume. So the format of your resume is a lot more restricted in a way, and there are very certain standards and expectations. Whereas your LinkedIn profile, that is truly a marketing instrument, although so is your resume, but there are certain standards that are definitely important here. Whereas on your LinkedIn, you have a bit more freedom and you have a lot more power to humanize that text, to make it sound like you, and to actually engage whoever it is that is reading your LinkedIn profile. You might not have that opportunity with your resume, simply because you're talking about a matter of seconds for people to decide whether they want to interview you or not. So your LinkedIn profile is broader in a way, broader than your resume, because on your resume, you're zooming in on one particular opportunity at one particular organization. And on your LinkedIn, you don't have to do that. But still, the rule, more information may not be better, still applies to your LinkedIn profile as well. So you got to make sure that you're filtering the type of information that markets you as a professional in your industry. And you're always thinking, why are you on LinkedIn? What kind of jobs or opportunities you are targeting, even if you're not actively job searching.
Yes. Awesome, awesome info. I cannot believe that we're at the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Anna, for all of the information. Those were great tips. I'm sure our members got a lot out of it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Wonderful. And now we are going to head into our monthly conversation between Andrew Seaman and LinkedIn's chief economist, Karen Kimbrough. And they're going to talk about the latest trends in the global job market.
Karen, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to talk with you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm excited to be here.
The first thing I wanted to ask you about is that even with the bank failures and the banking system upheaval we saw within the past month, and also continued inflation, LinkedIn's projections for the global economy haven't changed that much, right?
That's right. And a lot of the trends that we've been looking at are actually just continuing along. And when we look at our own data in detail, we can actually identify that there's been like a 30% decline in hiring from a year ago. And that's on average across all sectors. But before I leave you with that note, I always like to add that it's not all doom and gloom. We are seeing still sectors where month on month there's some increases, or even year on year. For example, healthcare is one of those sectors that's only slowed a tiny bit, and that's relative to a really fast pace a year ago. So healthcare is holding in really well, education is holding in, government administration's holding in. So a lot of sectors where we still see momentum.
It seems that, except for some European countries, there's a little bit more slack in the labor market, which probably means that employers have a little bit more of an upper hand than they did, let's say, 6 or 12 months ago, right?
That's right. I mean, I feel like I can now say slack is back. In the US, the labor market had been really tight. And when I say tight, I mean employers who are looking to fill roles, and there were a lot of open roles, were struggling to find enough candidates. Previously, there would be, for one open job on our platform, there would be one, say, active job seeker. And now, for one open job, there are 2 active job seekers. So the competition is now maybe a tiny bit more amongst the job seekers than it is amongst the employers, if that makes any sense. So that's why I'm saying that the slack is starting to creep back into the labor market, even though it still is a resilient and fairly strong market.
And something else that I thought was really interesting that I saw in the newsletter from the Economic Graph team is that job search intensity has increased. What is job search intensity, and why would it be spiking in certain countries?
I call it almost like job seeking behavior. And what we're seeing increasingly is that when people come on to do a job search, they are searching more broadly for different types of roles. And this is what we actually measure, is how many applications do they make. For any particular individual, you came on, I'm just going to make up a number here, you came on and you applied to 3 roles, and now you've come back a year later, and now you're applying to 6 roles. So you might be applying to more roles as an applicant, and that's one measure of job seeking intensity. And I think what it really means, to answer your question, Andrew, they may be more motivated to find a job that pays them what they want to earn.
Another thing that I saw in the newsletter was that, when it comes to remote work, employers seem to want people back in the office. So we're actually seeing a pretty big decrease in the number of remote roles that are being advertised, right?
What we're seeing is that when employers are adding that next job that they want to hire for, they're no longer choosing to make it remote, less and less. So we're seeing fewer and fewer remote jobs. And in the past, you might have said like 1 in 5 jobs. So 20% of all the jobs offered remote. Now it's 1 in 9, but there's no waning in appetite for remote roles by job seekers. And everybody loves the idea of that flexibility that remote offers, or even hybrid offers. So if you are a job seeker looking for a remote role, you can set alerts on LinkedIn using a remote filter that we have, and that will alert you when remote jobs are posted. And of course, being an early in the queue to apply is always a plus. You get that extra eye on you.
What is your message to job seekers?
It might take longer, but it doesn't have to. It's not all negative. There are definitely still industries that can't hire. I have people anecdotally coming up to me saying we just can't find enough folks. So there's lots of demand still there. And we do still see hiring increases month over month in 8 of the 20 industries that we're tracking. So there's, I don't want to leave people with a sense that they have to fight tooth and nail to find the role. But I do think that if it's getting a little bit more competitive in this hiring landscape, it's really important to kind of make sure that your skills kind of almost match as well as possible what the job description is looking for, so that you kind of show up as an ideal candidate.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's always fantastic talking with you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you.
And for more job market insights, Andrew just released a bonus podcast episode with Karen, and you can check that out by hitting the link in the comments. And coming up this week on the Get Hired podcast, Andrew sat down with Carrie Hannon, who is a senior columnist at Yahoo Finance. They talked about how to overcome ageism. You can check out the episode wherever you listen to podcasts when it's live on Wednesday, May 3rd. And thank you again, everybody, for joining. This is my last Get Hired Live, so I just wanted to thank Andrew and the entire team for the opportunity. It has been a pleasure, and good luck to all of you in your job search.